The screaming didn't fade, it fractured. A sound dragged across stone like metal teeth. Moscow, August 1570. Inside the Kremlin's throne hall, the marble floor glistened with blood so thick it reflected the torches like a mirror. Ivan IV did not blink. He watched. Before him lay what was left of a Russian prince, a man who had entered that chamber with a title, a lineage, a name, and left as something unrecognizable. Not killed, not executed, unmade, no sword stroke, no battlefield. Just humiliation so deep it stripped the soul first, the body second. Ivan had discovered a truth most kings never said aloud, but eventually learned. A man can survive pain. He cannot survive shame. That night, a new kind of cruelty entered human politics. Punishment not aimed at the body, but at identity, at masculinity, at legacy, at bloodline. And once rulers discovered that sexual humiliation could burn deeper than death, history changed. This is not a story about torture. This is a story about weaponized humiliation. The moment punishment became psychological warfare, when monarchs realized you don't need to kill a man to destroy him. You only need to make him wish he had died. Shame is not a wound the body can heal from. It is a wound that lives inside memory, inside lineage, inside reputation. And rulers understood this. A sword can kill one man, but public humiliation kills his legacy, his name, his family's honor, his bloodline dignity, sometimes for generations. That is why these monarchs chose it, because pain ends. Disgrace echoes. These punishments were never spontaneous outbursts of rage. They were policy, deliberate, theatrical, engineered to be watched, remembered, and feared. The purpose wasn't execution. The purpose was obedience through terror. A terror rooted not in death but in intimate violation. If they killed you, fear died with your corpse. But if they destroyed you first, everyone who witnessed it carried the fear forward. That is why this story matters. When a ruler learns he can control bodies by destroying dignity, there are no limits left. Now the descent begins. The first monarch who perfected humiliation as statecraft, the man who didn't just punish treason, but performed it in front of an audience. The ruler who made shame a recognizable weapon of the throne, Ivan IV. With the Tsar who turned execution into spectacle and humiliation into government policy, Ivan IV did not invent cruelty, he professionalized it. For the first 13 years of his reign, 1547 to 1560, he governed like a conventional monarch. But when his wife Anastasia Romanovna died in 1560, likely poisoned, something inside him split. By 1565, he created the Oprichnina, a parallel state with its own laws, its own territory, and its own army. 6,000 black-clad riders whose loyalty was not to Russia, but to him personally. They were not soldiers. They were instruments, and their weapon was not steel. It was shame. The purpose was not death. It was destruction of identity. Ivan realized something most rulers never articulated. A dead traitor is irrelevant. A humiliated traitor educates the living. Punishments were staged like theater. Victims were not executed quickly. They were unmade in front of an audience. Foreign ambassadors recorded it in their diaries, sometimes, switching into Latin mid-sentence because describing it plainly felt obscene even to them. Eyewitness Henry von Staden, a German mercenary, who served in the Oprichniki from 1564 to 1570, later wrote, "The Tsar laughed as he destroyed men first in spirit, then in flesh." Ritual of public unmaking, a nobleman accused of treason was not judged. He was displayed, stripped naked in front of clergy, diplomats in the court mocked, taunted, and forced to stand powerless, mutilated in ways designed to erase his masculinity before ending his life. Ivan didn't just orchestrate executions, he staged moral annihilation. Novgorod, where the method became a weapon in January 1570, Ivan unleashed the most chilling demonstration of sexualized terror in Russian history. The Novgorod massacre lasted 5 weeks. The Oprichniki cordoned the city. No escape, no appeals. The wives and daughters of suspected conspirators were rounded into the central square, not killed, violated publicly, while their bound husbands and fathers were forced to watch. Monks chronicled it. Polish ambassadors corroborated it. Hanseatic merchants trapped in the city described it in letters home. This was not slaughter, it was psychological warfare. The lesson Ivan learned and then taught the world. When a ruler destroys a body, he kills a man. When a ruler destroys dignity, he kills generations of loyalty. Ivan understood that fear rooted in shame lasts longer than fear rooted in death. And other monarchs, across empires and centuries, copied him. Rome. When the bedroom became the throne room, jump back 1,500 years before Ivan, to the capital of the most powerful empire on earth, Rome. 37 AD, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus becomes emperor at age 24. History remembers him by another name, Caligula. For the first 6 months, he was adored, tax relief, public shows, gifts to the people. Then he fell gravely ill. When he recovered, something inside him did not. He no longer wanted obedience. He wanted humiliation, Rome's weak point. Dignitas, Roman men didn't fear death, they feared disgrace. Honor was currency, and a wife's chastity was the symbol of a man's worth. Caligula recognized this pressure point and pressed his boot into it. The Senate banquets. At imperial banquets, fully public state occasions, Caligula would point to a senator's wife. No word spoken, no accusation, just a gesture. Guards escorted her out to his chambers, sometimes in a room separated by a thin wall, where the Senate could hear everything but do nothing. Then she was returned, forced to sit beside her husband, while Caligula loudly reviewed her performance as if discussing livestock. The real punishment wasn't the act. It was the eyes that saw it, the witnesses who could never forget. Forced marriages, living execution, humiliation became policy. He ordered noble women to divorce and remarry on command. He paired aristocratic daughters with actors, the lowest social profession. He turned Rome's sacred marriage contract into a weapon of degradation, refusal, no treason, silence, survival. When a senator objected, one man broke, Valerius. Catullus stood in the Senate and denounced Caligula as a disgrace. Caligula didn't kill him, not immediately. He ordered the senator held down and raped by gladiators in front of the entire Senate, then calmly asked, "Do you still object?" Catullus never spoke again. He died 2 weeks later, not from a blade, from obliterated dignity. The full Caligula ruled 4 years. His assassins were not rebels or enemies. They were Praetorian officers whose wives he had violated. On January 24th, 41 AD, they cornered him in a palace tunnel and stabbed him over 30 times. They didn't just remove a tyrant. They erased a humiliation. Caligula proved something no battlefield ever could. When a man's identity is his honor, sexual humiliation is political death. Next, the theater of humiliation moved west to England, where shame wasn't inflicted in bedrooms, but in courtrooms, on paper, in public record forever. The king who turned the courtroom into a weapon, England, 1536. Henry VIII wants his wife gone, not politically, not quietly, but publicly erased. Anne Boleyn didn't just have to die. She had to be destroyed first. The arrest, May 2nd, 1536. Anne is arrested on fabricated charges of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother. The evidence was absurd. Dates didn't match pregnancies. Witnesses contradicted each other, but Henry wasn't building a legal case. He was building a spectacle. Trial as sexual execution court records, preserved in the British National Archives, show the real aim. Not conviction, humiliation. The prosecution read the charges in explicit pornographic detail. Positions, alleged words, bodily reactions, invented lustful behavior. Not because the jury needed proof, but because the kingdom needed a show. Anne had to die not as a queen, but as a woman, stripped of dignity first. Even foreign ambassadors who witnessed it said the detail served no legal purpose. It was meant to break her socially before killing her physically. Catherine Howard. The final lesson. 6 years later, Henry did it again. His fifth wife, Catherine Howard, was only 17 when accused. Before her execution on February 13th, 1542, she too was forced to sit through graphic public testimony about her own alleged sexual acts, read aloud by elderly noblemen. The humiliation was the punishment. The beheading was just punctuation. Forced marriages as state weapon, Henry also used marriage itself as humiliation. He forced noble families to give daughters to husbands chosen specifically to degrade them. Men who were old, cruel, politically ruined, or socially beneath them. Refusing such a marriage meant treason, and treason meant death. It wasn't execution. It was living exile inside shame. The end of the tyrant. Henry died in 1547, diseased, swollen, rotting from the inside. But the legacy he left behind was chilling. Political death no longer required a sword. A courtroom, a rumor, a scripted humiliation was enough, but there was one ruler who took this idea even further. A king who believed punishment should not merely stain a name, but tear flesh itself in symbolic ways, so the method of death reflected the crime. That ruler was Vlad III, and he made humiliation structural, architectural, visible from miles away. When punishment became a message carved into flesh, Wallachia, 1459, Vlad III, later known as Tepesh, the Impaler, ruled a borderland between empires. To survive, he didn't just kill enemies, he turned their bodies into warnings. Unlike Ivan or Henry, Vlad didn't hide his brutality in courts or chambers. He displayed it. Punishment was not something you heard about. It was something you saw from the road, for miles. The adultery case. A married woman is brought before him, accused of infidelity. The legal penalties available to him were ordinary. Fines, imprisonment, divorce. Vlad chose none of them. Instead, he ordered a sexualized execution, a stake driven through her vagina, exiting through her chest. Then her body was lifted upright in the town square. She did not just die. She became a public symbol of moral order through terror. Independent confirmations exist across German pamphlets, 1480s, 1490s, Romanian chronicles, and monastic accounts. A woodcut printed in 1488 survives with the caption, "Thus Dracula punishes unfaithful wives." The same shame for men. He used mirrored methods for male offenders, often castration before impalement. Their severed organs nailed to their bodies or displayed. This wasn't random savagery. It was ritual humiliation. The Russian manuscript, The Tale of Dracula, c. 1490, recorded, "He destroyed not merely their breath, but their pride. Humiliation first. Death second, the forest of the impaled." In 1462, when Sultan Mehmed II invaded Wallachia with 90,000 soldiers, Vlad left a message. Outside Târgoviște stood what chroniclers called the forest, nearly 20,000 bodies on stakes, many mutilated in obscene ways before death. Niccolò Machiavelli later wrote that even hardened conquerors grew sick at the sight. Mehmed II, the same sultan who conquered Constantinople, retreated in horror. It wasn't a battle. It was terror as strategy, shame as military deterrent. The lesson Vlad proved that sexualized terror could move armies, not through force of arms, but through force of dread. When a king controls not only life and death, but dignity, legacy, the body itself, rebellion becomes unthinkable. Now all 4 tyrants have been introduced. The next section, Part 7, will connect the pattern, how each ruler discovered the same psychological truth independently, across centuries and continents, that there is no form of domination more complete than humiliating the body in front of witnesses. 4 rulers, 4 eras, 4 cultures with nothing in common. And yet all of them eventually reached the same conclusion: killing a traitor, ends him. But humiliating him ends the idea of him. That is why these methods spread not by contact, but by instinct, by rulers independently discovering the deepest lever of control. You can die bravely. You cannot be dishonored bravely. A battlefield death makes a martyr. A public humiliation makes a warning. Death erases one life. Shame erases memory, and that is why it was effective. These rulers didn't need mass prisons. They didn't need spies in every house. They only needed a public square. And a single example. One broken body could govern 10,000 unbroken ones, not by law, not by fear of death, but by the deeper fear. If they can do that to him, what will they do to me? This is why these punishments were always public, never private. Why they always involved an audience. Why victims were not simply killed, they were staged. These kings all discovered the same truth. People don't obey tyrants because of violence. They obey because of humiliation. What they built eventually consumed them. Humiliation works, but only for a while. The same weapon that keeps subjects silent is also the one that builds hatred slowly, invisibly, permanently, because a man who loses his dignity fears his king. But a man who watches another lose his dignity never forgets. The deeper lesson: these kings thought shame kept them safe, but shame is a debt, not a victory. It does not disappear. It waits, and when the day comes, it repays itself in blood. The victims, the chronicles, preserve the tyrants' names. The victims, the thousands mutilated, paraded, violated, disgraced, are mostly nameless, but it is because of them that laws eventually changed. The idea of bodily dignity, the invention of cruel and unusual. Punishment as a crime international, bans on sexual humiliation in war, human rights protections, all of them are the aftershock of these regimes. The world, learning slowly, painfully, that there must be limits to power. The final warning. People say history repeats itself. It doesn't. People repeat themselves, especially when they believe no one is watching. The torture chambers are gone. The impalement fields are gone. The royal courts are gone. But the mindset, the belief that power has no limit, is always waiting to return. Somewhere right now, someone with authority is discovering the same idea Ivan found in 1570. Not how can I kill my enemy, but how can I erase their dignity? That is where tyranny begins, not with a sword, but with the first act of humiliation someone believes they can get away with.